So what a day. I'm really inspired in a way, more than I have been in the past 3 years. It's just, I feel like something's happening. It's bubbling up. And we're going to find ourselves, I think, in a few years in a much better place. So I want to just reference a couple of things. We had a discussion on pain, and I just thought this story was worth telling. I have a friend who recently had a brain aneurysm, a type of aneurysm, and couldn't, had to stay silent. She had excruciating pain in her head. And they said, you can't look at screens, you just sit in the dark. Okay, you can listen to music. The only music that helped her was Jimi Hendrix, as loud as she could play it. And if the volume, really as loud as anything could go, and if the volume came down or if it turned off, the pain came flooding back. So I sent this to our neurologist colleagues at the National Institutes of Health, and I said, what do you make of this? And they sent these fabulous photographs of a study that was done that showed, what intense pain looks like in an fMRI, and it had big red lines around us, circles, these thick circles, and then when listening to music, all the red disappeared. It was a much smaller blue circle. So there's, and they said, as far as the reason why, who knows? And I also want to mention that Esperanza Spalding's chapter in my book is phenomenal. And one of the best panels I've heard was one that she gave with her co-writer, music therapist Marisol Norris. They have a new group called Black Music Therapy, and her chapter really addresses how this has not been a kind of something that's really been there for everyone, and that it should be. So Dan and Indre and Stacy all have chapters in the book as well. So let's just start with that. Dan, Neuroanatomy. I tell everybody, when they start, that they should start with evolution with Ani Patel, and then you, and then probably Nina Kraus, who talks about the nature of sound and hearing. But tell us a little bit about your chapter.
I didn't know this was going to be on the test.
Well, you can also talk about your next book.
No, the neuroanatomy of music has undergone a kind of reevaluation and re-understanding by neuroscientists in the field. When I first entered the field in the 1990s, we had just gotten these tools of brain scanning. We conducted in my lab one of the first studies of music in a brain scanner, in an fMRI machine. And at that time, we were doing what you might call neurocartography. Where is pitch? What are the maps? Where is pitch? Where is rhythm? Where is melody? Where is timbre? Where is Jimi Hendrix versus Renée Fleming in the brain? And that came out of a naive understanding based on something called the localization hypothesis, which was that different mental operations are located in different bits of cortical real estate. Just like you might say, well, logging is in Northern California and the entertainment industry is in Southern California. We had these maps of the brain. And then somewhere on the way to 2015, we came to realize a funny thing happened, which was we came to realize, well, no, the brain doesn't work that way. There are these circuits that are spatially distributed. And so it doesn't really make much sense to talk about this happens there. Rather, well, this might be a computational hub, but it has tentacles and roadways that stretch all over the place. And so it's sort of like asking, where is gravity in this room? Well, it's kind of down, but it pulls things down, but there's gravity up there too. And it's spatially distributed. So that was a real revelation. And who knows, in another 20 years, what we'll think. But the short version of how the musical brain works is that if you, like me, learned in school that music is right brain and math is left brain, that's not true. Music involves both hemispheres. If you are right-handed, language is probably processed in the left side of your brain. And the act of learning music theory shifts some of the musical knowledge to the parts of the brain that represent it. Like if you learn the name of a chord, or you learn the name of rhythm, like rumba, naming things happens in the left side of the brain. But music is really bilateral, and it involves the front and the back and the surface of the cortex and subcortical areas. And I think the most important finding in the brain and music literature probably is that music activates the same reward centers of the brain in the limbic system, with esoteric names like the nucleus accumbens and the ventral tegmental area and the amygdala. Sorry, I didn't name them. But it activates those same areas as having a drink of water when you're really thirsty, or eating when you're really hungry. This sort of dopamine, internal endogenous opioid reward center is activated by music. And ours was the first lab to show that dopamine is released when you listen to music, but not any music, music you like. And ours was the first lab to show that endogenous opioids are released, again, when you listen to music you like. Opioids, the same as OxyContin and the pills that you take. The brain doesn't release them in pharmaceutical levels, but in levels high enough that you can probably reduce your need for opioid medication using a smaller dose, using it for less time, or maybe none at all. Maybe you can get by with music and aspirin, or music and an Advil.
Just a quick follow-up to that. Let's say that, there's 100% that we could know about the brain. Where are we on that map? What do we know about the brain?
Well, part of the problem is that it's a wonderful question. Part of the problem is that we don't know what we don't know, right?
Fair enough.
You remember there are known knowns and known unknowns, and then the unknown knowns and the unknown unknowns. So what we know is maybe 1/10 of 1% of what there is to know. But I'll defer to other neuroscientists here on that.
Okay, I'm glad. Well, at least that's something the question you always wanted to ask, and we're afraid to ask. So now I know there's no answer.
It's a myth that we use 10% of our brain. That's a total myth. We're using every part of our brain all the time.
Oh, good. There's another thing that's just been correct. Thank you. Okay. Wow. If anybody else have questions they want to ask and find out what today's answer is, you're welcome. So, Indre, talk about your chapter. I mean, Indre, you do so much more than music education, but that's what your chapter is about in this book. So I want to talk about many of your other projects as well, but just start with that.
Sure. So my chapter is called Humans Are Musical Creatures, and it came out of a white paper that was funded by the Gordon Getty Foundation, actually, called Music for Every Child. And I was tasked with the goal, essentially, of giving educators and policymakers and parents a kind of executive summary of all the changes that happen in the brain with musical training. And so I did that very diligently, and we listed all kinds of brain regions. The musician's brain is a model of neuroplasticity, but ultimately the thing that I found most compelling out of all of that work was that music programs in schools, especially the good ones, bring kids to school. So schools that have music programs have better attendance. And as educators know, butts in seats are essentially money for the school. So it became a kind of economic argument. And then one of my favorite statistics out of that white paper came from doing some of the math, which is that because schools that have these music programs and because kids that are involved in music programs have higher graduation rates, if you essentially have one graduate out of high school in California, the net societal gain is $500,000 compared to a student who doesn't graduate. And so there are all kinds of reasons why this is, but I also just want to point out that this entire day, there have been two people over here who've had the most difficult job. The ASL interpreters have been translating all of this. And I have been watching them, and I have to say that they are a great example of one of the things that music does for us, which is shows us what seems impossible is possible. And so kids who are native sign language users actually have different brains. They see things in that interpretation that those of us who are not native sign language users do not even see. We do not even perceive that. And that's the same thing that music training can do for kids. I'll give you one last example, which is that kids that are born in noisy urban environments are actually at higher risk for language and communication problems later on because they learn to tune out sound. There's so much sound in their environment, it's not useful, they have to tune it out. So they actually don't hear things, and they often have higher rates of auditory processing problems like dyslexia later on. Turns out that musical training can reverse that risk. And actually, kids then who come from these environments who have musical training have lower rates of these language and communication disorders. So that's a nutshell.
Yes. Hear, hear. Right, exactly. So, Stacy, tell us a little bit about your background. You've been here before, and you've told the story before, but there are probably a lot of new people here today. Your background and how you ended up being a music therapist, but a psychotherapist.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, and thank you for including me in this amazing anthology. It's just beautiful and wonderful, and it's so good to be here.
It's such a moving chapter. It is really beautiful.
And I appreciate that. It really is something that I put my heart into because it really speaks to my own journey of how I did not set out to become a music therapist. That wasn't my plan. As I've mentioned many times before, I was a child artist. I was one of those kids that actually went to a music program, and I was at an art school, and I was a cellist and also a rapper at the same time. And I had my first record deal when I was 16, and so I got into the music industry very, very, very young, at a young age, and it just grinded me up into pieces. I mean, psychologically, emotionally, mentally. And for me, it was very difficult to detach from that idea of myself being this big star. And I suffered a lot in my early 20s until I got to grad school and became a music therapist and actually found that there was another identity for me. There was another way for me to be able to be in service, which then also helped me come back to myself as an artist in a different way. Not with that hunger of needing to have the immense external validation, which unconsciously, that was kind of what I was seeking as a child. And I've mentioned this before, that I do think this is something that does happen to a lot of child artists that don't make it. It's that there is some kind of maybe mental or emotional kind of wound. For me, it was abandonment, and that it kind of gets filled when you're on stage, and that works great until you're not on stage, or until something happens that kind of hijacks that path. So I was really one of the lucky ones. I haven't said this in public at all, but it's a miracle that I didn't turn out in that way. And one of the reasons why is because of music therapy. And so this chapter is really the story of how I thought I was something, and I'm sure we can all relate to kind of like this myopic view of what you might think you are. And then as they say, if you want to make, God or the universe laugh, make plans. So this was a bigger plan. It was a bigger vision to place me in the Children's Hospital, a job that I not only didn't really want, but it was a huge departure from my mental health work. I was always working in psych hospitals and treatment centers. So to be at a children's hospital was a completely new place. There were moments I didn't feel like I belonged there, and I questioned whether I was making a difference. So this chapter covers my work with two particular amazing patients that I work with. One, I can tell you, her name was Alyssa, and her family they came all the way from Guam because one of their children actually had cancer, and she was testing to see if she could donate bone marrow. And when she was unable to, basically when she did the test, they found out that she actually had it. And yeah, it was terrible. So here's this family with two children that have cancer. And unfortunately, her brother passed, and she was in the hospital getting bone marrow treatments, and she popped up in my caseload. And I walked in and immediately just was, entranced by this amazing family, this amazing support system that was there for her. And we wrote songs together, we created music together. And one of the magical moments was that they had recorded her brother's voice before he had passed away, and it just so happened that the song that we wrote together was in the same key as her brother's voice recorded, and so we blended it together so that he was actually in the song in the room, and it was just magical. And what I hope people can get from the story is, you know, these incredible moments, you know, that happen in these hospital rooms, and why it's so important. I mean, we've heard all day, right? Why arts are important. And so I'm just really honored that I've had the opportunity in my career to just work with such amazing people where I've seen and I know that the arts made a difference.
So is the news piece still on YouTube?
Yes.
Can you tell people how to find it? Because it's incredible.
Yes. So I believe it's the CBS News, and you could pretty much just Google at this point or do a YouTube search for music therapy, Children's Hospital, CBS, and you can put my name in there. It'll show up, Stacey Amon Yeldell, and
It's
you'll
with
see the
this
news
family.
piece. Yeah, with the family.
And
Just
talk
amazing.
briefly about the other patient, because I adored him.
Yeah. Oh, yes. So Jordan, was a little boy that I met, and the story that I tell is the first day that we met. I walked into the hospital room because, by the way, I don't know who's in the caseload until I get there that day. I don't know who's going to be there. I just kind of walk in the room and they're there. And so I was like, came in with my guitar and my little bag of instruments like I normally do, and I was like, "Good morning." He was like, "Get out," you know. So I was like, "Oh no!" And so we had this kind of this shared resistance is what I call it, because this was my early kind of first couple months there, and again I had resistance to being there. I didn't think I belonged there, and he didn't want to be there either, you know. And so there we were, and it's like, okay, so what do we do here? Neither one of us, you know, kind of want to be here. And but we really did connect through music. I talk a lot in that chapter about the ISO principle, which is a music therapy concept about meeting people where they are. And so that's what I learned from him, was that I wasn't there to change anything. I was there to validate his experience, to match it, and then, you know, by meeting him where he was in that moment, we had these experiences where his affect did change, because he was validated in that moment. And so there's a tease that I'm not going to share, because at the end of the chapter there's like a twist with his story. So I'll let you read that. I won't give it away.
Yeah, but amazing. Sarah, you are not in the book. You are representing the Music Man Foundation, which really, I know. Thank you so much. I just, you are everywhere in all of the organizations that I work with, and we're all incredibly grateful. So talk a little bit about what you do and with the audience, and share sort of what kinds of things you're funding.
Sure. And I might start even with some backstory as to why this work is important to the Music Man Foundation. The Music Man Foundation was started about 25 years ago by Rosemary Wilson, who was the widow of Meredith Wilson, who wrote The Music Man. And she left the foundation with a somewhat of a loose mandate to give back through music, do good through music. And so some of the things that we look to in terms of charting the foundation's path are, well, first, the musical, that Harold Hill came to town, and the power of what happened in that community when music education was introduced, even when the instruments weren't yet there. The transformation that occurred, we look to that. We look to, there was an essay that Meredith wrote about, because he was involved with Armed Forces Radio, and there was an essay that he wrote about being at a hospital with veterans and playing music and observing changes in the patients. And it was, you know, before there were really, he didn't really have the language for what that was, you know, what we now know as music therapy, and the powerful changes that can occur because of it. And so we looked to that, and then lastly, Meredith passed away from complications with Alzheimer's, and so just anecdotal information from Rosemary about how music was important to him and meaningful to him in those, you know, near the end of his life. So all those things sort of pointed us to, we need to do something with music and health. And when I started in 2017, it was, you know, this was still somewhat of an emerging field. There weren't gatherings like this going on quite yet. And so we first got very involved with music therapy programs, and that was sort of our entree to this larger music and health work. And that was really most initially through the sound health work that was happening at the Kennedy Center. And our first involvement was in September of 2017, supporting the Kennedy Center and that very first sound
That's when
health
we started,
weekend.
yeah.
Yes, and so kind of trying to quickly fast forward us from September of 2017 till today. We started with music therapy. We funded about 10 different programs here in Southern California that were music therapy in schools, music therapy in residential centers, music therapy in Children's Hospital, different instances of music therapy, and really kind of got to know the field kind of, in a tangible way, because we could go observe the programs, meet the clients, and that, we were very compelled by by everything we saw, but there was an appetite. We knew there was something more out there. The pandemic happened, and so we focused our support mostly on programs in Los Angeles County, and then now, as we've mostly somewhat emerged from the pandemic, it was sort of time for us to fulfill this in a much bigger way of what could we do for music and health. And so what that looks like is support of the Sound Health Network's efforts, the NeuroArts Blueprint, and the LA Opera, Able Arts work. There's so many people here in the room today whose work we fund and admire, and I'll pause there and I'll come to some other things.
Well, you've been really wonderful about saying a couple of times, let's stop talking about it. We all know it works, so what are we going to do? So what do you see as sort of the ripe opportunities right now?
Great question.
By the way, you can all answer that.
Yeah. And if anyone wants to go first. With the ripe opportunities.
I mean, I will say that one of the big challenges when you have interdisciplinary work is that everybody comes with a different knowledge set. And to bring back to Dan's earlier point is that even if you're an expert in your current field, you often overestimate how much you might know in another field, and you don't know what you don't know. So oftentimes I think we sort of get into this position where we actually have to spend a lot of time interacting before we start to really respect the other person's way of knowing. And some of the funding that the Music Man Foundation now has allotted to is to seed these interdisciplinary collaborations. And I'll just give you one example from some of my work, which is as the president of the Society for the Neuroscience of Creativity. We're a 10-year-old society, we are creativity researchers, and we thought, well, we have all this stuff now that shows how important creativity is in kids and how we can train them to be creative, and all these employers are telling us that we want creativity in the workforce, so let's bring the educators into our conference and just tell them what we know. And the educators were very polite, and they nodded and they smiled and said, yes, that's all very nice. And then afterwards at happy hour, they said, but we're never going to use any of it. And we were like, wait, what? Why? We just told you all these things that we know. And they said, because you don't know the one thing that we know that is really important, which is that ultimately right now in the current educational environment, we are teaching to the test, and our parents and so forth, they want to know what's going to help our kids get into college. And creativity is not that. So that was shocking to us. So we went back and we said, but creativity should be that. And so we started working with the whole conglomerate of universities to help them look at creativity measures in their admissions cohort. And we showed them that there is this additional work of research that says creativity is predictive of the GPA. In fact, our current tools now that we have are almost as predictive as the SAT of GPA performance, but 15 times less discriminatory. And so then we developed, so anyway, it goes on and on, but now we can go back to the educators and say, in the next year or two, just wait and see, universities are going to start looking at creativity in college admissions essays, and now it's going to be important. So now you can tell the parents and the supervisors, et cetera, that this is what you need in the classroom.
So I just think that's so incredible. Steve Jobs would have a heart attack if he heard that, because we all know that creativity and innovation are linked. They're absolutely linked. Creativity and just about everything in terms of success is linked. So, I mean, it shocks me that educators and superintendents and certainly the people who devise these tests aren't really testing for that. So do you think you'll have any success reaching them?
I do think so, because I think we have really compelling, and I think it's only going to get more important with generative AI taking over a lot of jobs that are really about automating things and not involving a lot of creativity. So yeah, I think I'm really bullish about the future of this, because I think it is going to be really important, and I think, you know, educators who have up until now been teaching to the test because that's where the funding has been, I think we're all starting to see too that funders are no longer as interested in test scores of schools, and neither will parents be, because the world is going to change. And they're going to look for the things that employers are looking for.
Well, actually, my children tell me that kids are really thinking twice about college because the expense is so tremendous and the value is not really panning out for them as well as it might. So, yeah, you're right. There's a lot of change afoot. So, thinking of that, are you concerned at all, any of you, about AI and how it might? So there's AI Gen. There are, you know, so many. The future of this. Will it have an effect? Will it be helpful in terms of? Obviously, we know that with data, AI can be incredibly useful. Large data sets can be analyzed quickly. What are your thoughts on this?
It's interesting. I have a theory. I think that there are going to be more and more people who are wanting to have live experiences, that are wanting to be in music, in circles, and I think this presents an opportunity for artists, and not just music, art as well. I think there's going to be a glamorization or maybe even a more focus on imperfection, because that is what is innately human. And I would even say an emphasis on soul-centered art, because that is innately human. So I'm a huge fan of AI. I think it's a great tool. You know, I used it the other day to write a business proposal. I was like, this is great, you know. But when it comes to art, you know, I've heard some of the music, and I think it's crazy that you can put a prompt in and have a song 3 minutes later. But again, I think what is going to be craved, if not now, very soon, is the human component of music making, which I don't think that there's anything that can take that away, and art making in general.
Well, it's perhaps a banal comment, but any technology can be used for good or for bad. We all, especially here in Los Angeles County, we take our cars for granted. We need our cars to get around, but cars are among the top killers of people in the country. It's a technology that's both good and bad, and self-driving cars are still responsible for terrible accidents and death. When the calculator first came out, there was talk in schools about, well, we don't need to teach our children arithmetic anymore. They can just use a calculator. And they don't need to learn their times tables, and they don't need to learn algebra as calculators got more complicated. But look at who it is that used calculators to the greatest effect. It was the engineers and the mathematicians. It was not a substitute for learning arithmetic or math. It was a tool that allowed people to do things they couldn't do before. And the analogy I'm making with AI is that right now, ChatGPT 40, the newest one, and Gemini, they can be used to cheat on tests. They can be used to get answers to questions that are wrong because they hallucinate. But you can program them. If you are an 8th grader and you're trying to learn algebra, you can say, I want you to work in Socratic mode or prompt mode. These are the problems I have. Ask me questions one at a time that will lead me to the answer so that I can learn the solution. When ChatGPT first came out, it's been a year and a half now, I think, I used it in a writing class. And I told students, I'd like you to write an essay the best that you can, and then ask ChatGPT to rewrite it in the styles of Ernest Hemingway, Zora Neale Hurston, F. Scott Fitzgerald, and Neil deGrasse Tyson, and learn about style. How would these different authors approach such a topic? Did ChatGPT reorganize the material in a different way than you organized it? it was and is a great boon if you use it that way. Similarly, I asked it to write a song just recently in the style of Steely Dan. And it's not something I'd want to listen to, but as a songwriter myself, it kind of sparked some creativity. These are some ideas that I can actually use now as a songwriter. So I think that the role of AI is a double-edged sword, but that creative people and technical people who are so inclined will use it to make their output better and possibly to make the world better.
Indre, Eric Whitaker was so fabulous today. That was such an inspiring presentation. I've seen his work, but I've never seen him present how he got there. Talk about your summer, what you're about to do. You knew I was going there.
I know. Well, so he had, several thousands of people in his virtual choir. In Lithuania this summer, it's the 100th anniversary of this UNESCO Cultural Heritage Festival of Song and Dance. Lithuania, the people are very much into singing. And so there is an event where something like 40,000 singers are going to come into a stadium with one conductor. The conductor shifts every song, by the way. It's a new conductor every time. And there are going to be 300,000 people in the audience in this massive park. And
Wait, could you just repeat that?
yeah, it's going to be 40,000 singers, as latest estimates, who are going to be singing the same pieces of music over the course of 4 hours of this concert in front of an audience of some 300,000 people. So we thought, well, this is kind of an unprecedented opportunity to look at the impact of choral singing on an almost nationwide scale, because the population of Lithuania is 3 million. So you're talking about like 10% of the countries there at this event. But so they tasked me with like trying to figure out how can we measure the impact of this event on sort of collective well-being and self-esteem, et cetera. So I have a team of researchers that I'm working with, including the Jameel Arts and Health Lab, which is going to collaborate with us in terms of disseminating the findings later on, but from Denmark and Tel Aviv and Vilnius University. And we have this three-pronged set of experiments. One is a set of surveys, much like the Arts Impact Measurement System, where we look at pre and post measures of well-being. And during the concert, we look at the experience of situational awe. And we're looking to see whether awe is a modulating factor that moves the needle for someone in terms of their well-being. And then we're looking at interpersonal synchrony using heart rate physiology. We have a whole bunch of heart rate monitors that are going to be going, and we're looking to see whether the synchronization process predicts people's sense of belonging in the group. And then the last element is single-channel EEG recordings of brain activity, also to look at synchrony. And then ultimately, we're going to be running over the course of the 6 days of the festival as many people as we can through this musical cognitive test to look whether lifelong choral singing is a protector of cognitive decline. So that's the study.
That's wonderful. And now you have an app you can use too, UCLA. That would be amazing. That's so wonderful. I'm going to share that with everybody. So let's talk about creative arts therapies, because how do we, and I use that term because visual art therapy is also incredibly powerful. Dance therapy in the form of movement, dealing with movement disorders, but it's also joyful to dance. I was in the disco era. What happened to dancing for fun? We only get to do it at weddings. So, yeah, I missed that. Tell me what you all think about what the next step is for really getting creative arts therapies embedded in healthcare, embedded in schools, and also reimbursed.
So I know I sound like a broken record. I said the same thing last year, but creative arts therapists need to be paid a living wage. It's yes. Unfortunately, I wish I could say it's better this year, but I've been looking, kind of observing a few of the music therapy boards in California, and there seems to be a bit of a mass exodus. Actually, one board is national, and there seems to be a mass exodus of music therapists leaving the field because we are not getting paid enough to live. And there was one big question where people were like, do you have to get another degree? How many people have had to go get another degree? And then now you have interns that that are popping in and saying, wait a minute, maybe I shouldn't get into this field if this is what's facing me. So, so that is a major problem that we need to be able to, make sure that the creative arts therapists that are getting these jobs are able to at least move forward. And I think one thing that could work is to really get clear on our titles. There's an interchangeability, particularly here in California. We get group with rec therapists. We get group with psych rehab therapists. There is not a lot of understanding or at least appreciation about the fact that we are clinicians. We have to go through the same kind of hours and training and internships. We have to recertify. We have to do all the things that our clinical counterparts, psychologists, et cetera, do. And so I think there just needs to be a lot more understanding of that and then some advocacy to make those changes on an institutional level so that it's something that's across the board. And the reason why I say that is because I've had situations where I've come in with my rate that is based upon my 20 years of being a music therapist, and I'm shamed for it or I'm laughed at because, again, on a institutional level or on what's built in is that, no, you're asking for too much because we always pay our music therapists this. So it's very, very, very bad. And I'm one of the people that's actually had to so-called leave the field and do other things because of this. So I'm not speaking from a place of having overcome it. So just from my perspective, I think that's one thing that definitely needs to happen for sure is bringing that awareness up around creative arts therapists so that we can keep getting them to come into the field is the other part, right? We don't want that to stop.
One of the things at the Sound Health Network that we worked very hard to do is to inform the public the difference between a music therapist and the work that they do, which is often one-on-one, which requires that intensive investment and that response to the client in the moment, and music-based interventions. Which can be essentially, something that can reach a lot of people and maybe doesn't have that same expensive infrastructure need of the one-on-one therapy. And I think a lot of people don't understand the difference between music therapy, as we're talking about it, and music-based interventions, which can be as simple as putting a piano in the lobby of a hospital, so I think that kind of vocabulary is important.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Sarah.
I know. Well, and I would just add, just sort of building, Stacey, on what you said is, besides the living wage, absolutely for music therapists, is also what we've observed is in many hospital settings, the music therapists are completely philanthropy funded, and the physicians are not, the nurses are not, but the music therapists are, and all the creative arts therapists that are there are fully philanthropy funded, and it's about making this societal and institutional commitment to valuing that training, valuing the work, and yeah, we're doing a little bit with the American Music Therapy Association to help them with their advocacy efforts because we think licensure in every state will also help the reimbursement.
So am I correct that it's 12 states now have licensed music therapists?
Or 14?
Is it up to 14 now? I got an email yesterday from Pennsylvania saying, will you help us? Because we're just about to be voted, and we think we're going to get it. But so in other words, this has to go across the country, state by state, licensure, because only with licensure and really across the boards, can we then kind of start to pitch for reimbursement, because that's the holy grail, is with, especially Medicare is getting in that kind of, like acupuncture and physical therapy, occupational therapy, so many other speech language pathologists, and really the definitions are so important. You're right. It's good that you're working with AMTA on messaging because the advocacy is key. So, and I do know that, for instance, there are groups in Congress. There are all these groups. There's one on neuroscience. Of course, there's education, and they're genuinely interested in it, and they never think about arts. So we're starting to make headway by just going, hello, pick me. We're here, and we have a lot to offer. They just don't think of it. They think of us as entertainment. So we're working on it. We're all working together. So on that note, so one of the things that came up earlier today was art care, which is something that I think would be wonderful. This would be by zip code, that people could kind of look and see what's already available to them in their areas. And performing arts centers offer so much. for kids with special needs, for caregivers and Alzheimer's patients to come to programming. You know, when the Musikverein in Vienna, the holy grail of performing arts venues, offered special concerts for caregivers and patients with dementia, this was news around the world. This was literally news in Asia, everywhere, because it was a Musikverein. So it is definitely happening, and it's available. It's just that people don't necessarily know about it. So we want to reach all of those folks. So the impact of technology, so telehealth, how is that going?
Telehealth is still a thing. I think one of the things I'm noticing more now are these hybrid situations, because I also do, music therapy groups in outpatient settings and things. And so you'll have a kind of telehealth situation at the same time as you have the in-person group. And so one of the things that's cool about that is that it gives people the opportunity to interact in either way. So I have not seen that as an impediment. I know that it's definitely been a journey for music therapists to figure out, how to do telehealth. I mean, we all are so different in how we do music therapy, but for me, it's been great because I feel as though I've been able to reach more people, but it goes right back to what you said about the licensure and that needing to be in place, because then it can be connected to the insurance companies and being able to get those reimbursements. Otherwise, it's really out of pocket, which of course is just not ideal for the kind of reach that I know that I want to have as a clinician.
Well, thank God for philanthropy, because that is really what is funding this around the country. I've been harping on my sister-in-law, who is a lot younger than I am, but she works for an architecture firm that does most of the new children's hospitals in the country. And I'm like, there has to be a creative arts studio in every children's hospital. If you look on the website for Mott in Ann Arbor, it is just extraordinary. What they offer there. It's small space, very low cost, non-pharmaceutical, non-invasive. These are real add-ons to healthcare. So in the last few minutes, first of all, I'm going to sign my book downstairs if anybody wants a copy, and wants to hear the voices of almost everyone on this panel, and get a taste for the breadth of the sector. And Dan mentioned your book coming out.
My book comes out August 27th. It's available for pre-order on all the usual places. And the book is called I Heard There Was a Secret Chord, Music as Medicine. And I would say it's the culmination of the last 10 years of the work in my lab and the work of 400 or 500 other researchers around the world trying to, and it grew out of this convening that we had in 2017 at the Kennedy Center that you and Francis and I participated in, along with Nina Kraus and Edwin Outwater and others, Charles Lim. That was really the catalyst for me realizing, there's a critical mass of studies now, an evidence base that music really does work. And if you had said to me 20 years ago, I'm gonna use music for medicine, I would have been skeptical. And in the last 2 years, I worked with the journal Nature. We did a quick little survey. In the last 2 years alone, 8,000 papers were published in peer-reviewed journals on music and medicine.
And you're starting you're actually behind a new journal.
Yes, we're with your. It was
really
your
excited.
idea and Francis's idea at our December meeting. We're going to launch a new journal dedicated to music, brain, and health.
Yeah, this will really move the needle. Yeah, this is thrilling. Indre, your book, real quick, tell us about your book, your latest.
Well, I have a project that I can't talk about yet, but the book I wrote that I think you're referring to is called How Music Can Make You Better. It's Tiffany blue, makes a great gift. It's only 15,000 words, it's a quick read. But really, it came out of this idea that it actually is part of a series that started with a book called How Art Can Make You Happy. And so it's like this whole movement. But I just want to say that one of the big reasons why we have a critical mass is because of you, Renee. Is that it's an outsized influence.
Oh, thank you. Well,
And by the way, if I may add to this, Renee knows as much about the neuroscience of music as any neuroscientist you'll meet.
Oh boy, now I'm blushing. But I had the same aha moment as Eric did, but it was sitting in a convening at the NIH and hearing 2 days of presentations. And I gripped my chair and I said, this is it. I am on fire with this. I didn't think I would understand a word of it, and yet I was completely inspired, absolutely inspired. And it's just fantastic to be with people who are doing something that is difficult. As Anjan Chatterjee said at Brain Mind a couple weeks ago, he said, we're neither fish nor fowl, and that's what's making this so hard. People understand what to do with the arts, people understand what to do with science, and we're in between, and everybody's still a little bit confused. It's messy. But we're going to keep refining our message and keep making the message stronger, and we're going to keep making bigger noise together. And before we finish, Stacy, your book, talk about it.
Oh, so I just wrote a book called Choose Yourself, a 12-week journey to becoming the God of your own heart. And it's a 12-week workbook, and it's really for the caregivers. It's for anybody who's in service to others, who wants to kind of find ways to give back to yourself. Actually, the meditation we did today is in the workbook with QR codes, and it's basically broken down into 3 modules, so you can build a daily practice over time to be in self-devotion to yourself so that you can better be in care for other people.
Boy, that should be everywhere. I needed that last summer.
I needed too. That's why I wrote it.
Anyway, thank you all, and I hope to see you downstairs. And we hope to see you next year. And let's try to find a way too to get your comments about what you'd like to hear about next year and what you'd like to have, how you'd like to participate as well. So thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you.